Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Only a Bag, a travel podcast. I'm Darcy Melton, and with me is...
Nathaniel Mellor. Hello, and thank you so much for having us back.
To your ears.
Yes.
To you all. Thank you. We've been gone for 6 months.
I think, maybe honestly almost 7, something like that.
Maybe more than
A lot longer than we expected. I think we expected to take maybe a month or two break when we went to the States. Mm-hmm. We ended up staying in the States for 6 months instead of 2. And basically, I think you were quite busy.
I was super busy. So I'm a full-time oil painter. That's my real job when we're not podcasting, which is great. And I taught a lot of workshops. I was in a few shows. I did some art fairs. So it was a lot. It was not possible for me to get in the podcast space.
Yeah.
And you were editing and beta reading. You were super busy.
It was lovely. It was fantastic. I think anyone who's listening who is a freelancer knows that I think when you have the overwhelming wave of work, it's both stressful and very fortunate feeling. No, I think that. And then we were staying with your family mostly, so it was kind of hard to find like a quiet time. We also were doing a lot with your niece, and we were doing a lot. It was just sort of like constantly family, and then even like small things, like I think we've both forgot how loud it can be.
Yes.
Like there's just cars going by all the time. There's somebody's mowing their lawn now.
Oh my gosh, people mow their lawns all the time.
It is
all
wild.
Hours of the day, every day.
Yeah. Which is not, I mean, here, there's definitely, but it's almost like there's a loud period here, and then there's a quiet period. And we often record in like the lunch hour. So it's usually really, really quiet. Like it is
That's
today.
true.
Like, what is it?
It's currently 1:00 here, local time.
Yeah, lunch has started. People are quiet. No, so that was just to give, I guess, a little bit about where we were, and I guess also I think we wanted to give a little idea of where we're
Headed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, so I think as you can tell by the name of this podcast, it's called Naples. We haven't figured the subtitle just yet.
Of this episode specifically?
But we're going to start doing, before we took our break, we were kind of breaking up all these podcast episodes into different cities and then some aspect of the city, whether it was food or walking around or culture. And I think that we realized it's not possible to kind of continue that, because at a certain point there's only like 10, 15 large cities in Italy, and then all of a sudden we start talking about smaller towns or smaller cities. And it's less interesting and less exciting unless you're planning on going there. But
you don't want to hear about the 5 best restaurants in some town you're never going to visit.
Exactly. But I also think that when we were back in the States, we realized that we were quite fortunate because we knew a lot about just general Italy life, Italy travel, things that I guess have become really commonplace to us. People were telling us like it was something they'd never heard of before. And then we realized like, oh, I guess, yeah, we had never heard of that either before going to Italy the first time. But
now we've been living here for 5 years. It's just become second nature.
Yeah.
Don't think about it.
And I think so we're going to basically change these the episodes slightly into sort of each month focusing on something slightly different. So this month, the rest of May, we're going to focus on Naples. And then I think maybe June, we're going to talk about like beaches, beach culture, especially if those of you want to find, if you were coming to Italy specifically to go to swimming, the sort of the do's and the don'ts, the free beaches versus paying for beaches, all that kind of stuff we wanted to cover. And then kind of July have a different topic and sort of move that way, because I realized that might be an easier way of keeping this information kind of, I think, not evergreen, but I think a lot of people talk about how information like this should be evergreen. And if we're talking about like our favorite restaurant in Siena, then if it's closed in 2 years, then it's like, well,
number one, really sad.
Yeah.
Number two, our information might not be that helpful.
So we I think we realized too, we still have people listening to our older episodes, which first of all, thank you so much, people who are listening, especially to the older episodes. It makes us feel like, oh, we created those for something good. I think because those first few episodes only had like 2 or 3 listens when we first put them out. So it's fun to see them have a couple hundred or even a few thousand listens. No, so I think that was just our attempt to, or that is going to be our attempt to sort of not even take this more seriously, but I realized we just...
No, it's just to bring helpful information. We're trying to do things in the way that's most helpful and most interesting, I think.
Yeah, okay, I like that. And ideally, too, we're going to try sticking to a schedule. I think before we were a little bit less on a schedule. It was just sort of loosely once a week, but sometimes it came out twice a week with an episode. Sometimes we didn't come out with an episode at all. So we're going to try to stick to Wednesdays being our release date. Because we figured that's kind of, at least for you listen to a lot of podcasts.
I do. I love podcasts.
And I think, well, like Wednesday is kind of when like a lot of people release on Monday and Tuesday, and it's sort of like, I know, I'm thinking of all the stuff I like to watch and stuff. It's like, man, by like after.
Yeah, by Tuesday I've binged all of my main podcasts. Yeah.
So I'm thinking that's like, oh, we could do Wednesday. And part of it too, we were like going into the psychology of this, trying to figure out like, do we want to release on Thursday and Friday? Because I'm like, I don't want you guys, to release on Monday, and then everyone starts equating this podcast to like, oh my God, I have to go to work. Well, thank God there's a podcast episode available, but still I have to go to work.
The narcissism that comes with us trying to schedule podcasts.
It's amazing. It's phenomenal.
When do people need us the most?
It is phenomenal how easily this changes into, well, the world's clearly just about me and what we think.
So we're going to try to come out regularly on Wednesdays.
That's a fun way of saying that. So
with helpful information.
Yeah. And without further ado, I think, no more ado to do. I said you don't do ado. You have ado?
I don't know, but we're going to talk about Naples.
And I think the first thing, actually, very briefly, is we also, I think, wanted to offer our first impression of Naples before we ever, maybe before we got there, and then once we first got there. And
because it was different for both of us.
I think it was different for both of us, and as we've mentioned this in the past, we went with your mom, and it was very different for her. I think she was like, this is not what I thought Naples would be like. And now that we're back in Italy and we meet people who go to Naples, I think there's a very common feeling of like, so that's not what I thought Naples would be like. And so we wanted to maybe give a little bit of our first impressions, and then get into the history and the food and the culture, the language.
So what was your first impression?
I think my first impression, very, very briefly, was going to pick you up at the airport in Naples when you first came. This is in like 2015. So this is 10 years ago. So it's a little bit older.
Yeah, that was 10 years ago. Okay.
And the only person I know who'd been to Naples before then was my mom. And she had just done a 3 or 4 week crash course in Italian. And she's like, oh, I love Naples. The buildings were, the Spanish Quarter. Oh, the food, the pizza, oh my God. And I was like, oh my God. And she's talking about this little piazza everywhere. And she's talking just about like, I don't know, this energy of Naples. And I'm thinking like quintessential Tuscany somehow. That's what I think I had in my head. I was thinking like, oh, this will be like Florence on the coast. I get there and I was super bummed. I think because the bus pulls up, guy says Naples, we all get off, and I'm like, this is a disgusting city, and I don't want to be here. And I think I picked you up from the airport, and then we got back on the bus to go back down south, but we never went to Naples, I think, until the next time we were staying there. It was like a week later, I think we went to Naples, starting a little Italian tour, and
I was doing the little tourist thing.
Yeah, and I think we saw more of Naples then. And that's when we both got the feeling of, oh, this is why people love Naples.
I have to say, though, I think you were still... No, was I more cold on it, or you were more cold?
That's a good question. I think... That's a good question. Because what was your first impression when you got off the plane?
I was so dazed that it was just, here's the city. There is some trash on the ground. And I'd looked up, before I traveled, I'd looked up like images of every city we were going to be visiting. So I had a general idea.
And so it might be I was a little more cold on Naples because I don't think I had seen, I know this is silly, everyone, but now I'm a lot more, I think, planning focused. And even I think when we started this podcast, I'm putting that in air quotes, you guys cannot see me. When we started this podcast some 2 or 3 years ago, I was less about planning. In a lot of the episodes we talked about, I was like, we just kind of fly by the seat of our pants. When I first went traveling 2013 and then 2015, it was the same thing. I was like, I'll just show up a place and see what happens. I've started to hate that method. I've realized when you plan just a little bit, you really can save yourself hours of pain and discomfort.
So I'd planned somewhat. Yeah. And I looked at photos, and I think I'd also seen Naples in movies roughly. Yeah, I had an impression of what it was going to be. And so my first main impression was when we were back and were staying in Naples for a few days. And it was very a part of I could see it being like a neighborhood in New York,
Okay.
but I also kind of love the grunge.
You were coming kind of all, you spent a year in New York at college. So I think you were coming from that. I'm in my grunge phase.
Yes,
I
I
want to rough
definitely
it.
was. Yes.
I want to be,
I
not that
wasn't
you,
personally in a grunge phase, but I
yes,
liked being around other people who
yes,
were.
you're
Yeah.
very clean. You're like, I don't want to be in a grunge phase, but I like that you are.
Yeah, exactly.
I want to have grunge friends.
Exactly. No, so I thought it was super cool. And it had and still has like weird little bookshops and
Oh my God, yeah.
cafes and like really like the trash on the streets and the gunk on the walls, and none of that fazed me. I was just like, yeah, we're in it. Since then, I've gotten older and I still love Naples, but it's like it's my love with New York and my love with Naples have gone in the same direction. I'm like, I love you for a small part of the
A
year.
day.
Yeah. For a few days, it's amazing, and then I need to go.
I think also we both have gone back more recently. Like, I mean, since 2015, we've gone back a few times, and every time it becomes a little harder to find. For I mean, in a good way, I should say. Like for those of you listening who are like, I'd love to go to Naples, but maybe it's a little. I don't know if grunge really fits what I'm going for. It's very. It's becoming more like veneered, for lack of a better word. It's
Yeah.
becoming more. There used to be a guy like singing on a like opera on his balcony. That's just because he was just some guy singing opera on his balcony, and now it's the guy singing opera on the balcony is doing that because he sees a crowd of tourists below, and there's a
Or he's going to end up on Instagram.
yeah, and it just was like just some dude is kind of drunk at 10 in the morning, and he's singing on the balcony, and he's just belting songs. But there's still a lot of, I think, like such a bad representation of Naples, but it really feels very
It's not
accurate.
that inaccurate,
It's
though.
not that
No.
inaccurate. No, I think, and I guess, and I think this is what I wanted to give the thing, because I think even when your mom came, she was very. I mean, the first thing she said when we got close to the hotel was like, if we need to like leave the city, we can.
She's
we
like,
can
we
just,
could find a different hotel. We could go to a different city.
yeah,
Like,
we can go somewhere else. And we're like, no, no, no,
and we're
no.
just walking
This is
along like,
Naples.
this is it. No.
This is
Yeah.
what you get. It is a, and it's, I think one of the best, I think the best way to talk, not talk about it, the best way to think about it is a city that's probably never been cleaned in the history of, it's 4,000 year history. It's almost like one of those, it's uncleanable. Like, I mean, and a part of it too is like, I think they use volcanic stone everywhere. So it's all black. Like the ground is all black. And then the walls are just like covered in years and years of soot and car exhaust and
And graffiti.
and I mean, it's just this sense that like it's a kind of a world constantly growing upon itself rather than ever
Absolutely.
like being cleaned. So that being said, it's amazing. It's lovely.
It really
a
is.
diamond in the rough.
Yes.
And how about some brief history?
Yes. So I'm love history. I'm not very good at recounting it. So Nathaniel, you're going to have to help me out a lot on talking about the history of Naples.
Okay, so you jump in, or
Okay.
I'll jump in. How
Okay.
would you like to?
So I think the coolest thing to me is that it's been around for a very long time.
Yeah.
The location, it hasn't always been Naples, but it's been a place that people live since what, the Neolithic period, which boggles my mind. But in the 6th century, it was Neapolis.
BC.
Right. 6th century BC. Thank you. It was Neapolis, and at that point, it was becoming a major port city.
It was also, for what it's worth, just to throw in
Yeah,
a
yeah,
little,
tell
it
me.
had been there. We'll talk about this more, I think, in a later episode. But there's the Magna Graecia, which is basically a giant immigration of Greeks coming from Greece to basically southern Italy, by and large, and settling in a lot of different towns, and specifically around the. So if you've never seen Naples, it's on a cape. It's like on a bay, essentially, and it's called the Gulf, I guess. It's called the Gulf of Naples.
Yeah.
Golfo di Napoli. And basic, I'm trying to give like, I guess, like a little bit of a geography. It's hard to explain. You guys can look at a map, I imagine, but for lack of a better word, just this giant gulf, and sort of inside in the gulf along like the land, there's Naples, and then jutting out below on one side is like the Sorrento coast and all these other like Pompeii and things like that, and on the north coast It's like Pozzuoli, Baia, Cumae, which is maybe it's still called Cumaea, but it's a Greek settlement from the Magna Grecia. And so actually the island is where the Castel d'Uovo is,
which
the
is a
egg
tiny
castle.
little island.
Ridiculously
Big
small.
castle.
Yeah,
I mean, big castle for the
giant
island.
castle built on a tiny little island.
Yeah.
But that island is actually where one of the first Greek settlements were.
Parthenope.
Yeah, I think something like that.
Parthenope.
Yeah, Parthenope. Still, interestingly though, people still call Napolitanos the Parthenopes sometimes. Like some articles were referred to them as the Parthenopes. But all that is to say, very briefly, I apologize, is it started a couple hundred years before that, and then eventually they were like, we should all become one city. This is ridiculous. We're a bunch of tiny towns, some on the port, some over here, some over there. We should just call it one.
And that's when it became Neapolis. Aha. And that's also, so that was the 6th century BC, and that's when Rome was like coming up, right?
That's
around
the
the same time.
Yeah, and I think it's like, not that there's a history in Rome, but Rome has a kind of false history of the Seven Kings, and this false history in the sense of like they like to give themselves a bit of prestigious history.
I mean, they made it up. It's a story.
There's no like actual proof for it, but it gave them a sort of agency in the world that they lacked otherwise. But it's kind of like while they were still messing around with, a swamp, Naples like was basically already called New City, and it's like by the time Rome was really doing anything, Naples was already a few hundred years old. So just to give you an idea, it's a much
in its new form, it was already
folder. It's an older city. And again, somebody who's into history who's listening to this might say, well, that's actually not true. These are going to be the broad strokes, if you will.
Yes.
This is going to be the to give everyone an idea, I think, too, of why Naples is so why it is the way it is, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. Because it's already changed, not already, but in the last 20 years, it's changed. In the last 10 years since you and I went, it's changed. I mean, it's still very much the same, but we can feel and see the differences. And in the 10 years before that, and a little bit longer, people were like, never go to Naples. You're going to get robbed. You're going to get this and that. And it's changed since then. So it's a rapidly changing city that has also very much been the same for a long time.
Yeah.
So that's, evidence in its ancient history. So we're going to do the broad strokes of that. Okay. So after Parthenope became unified with the other cities around it, little, not cities, neighborhoods, bits and pieces.
Cities, I think.
Cities.
Towns.
Okay. It was Neapolis. And then after that, it was a Greek colony under Syracuse.
Yeah.
Right? Was Syracuse a kingdom, or the kingdom of Sicily didn't exist yet?
The kingdom of Sicily I don't think existed yet. Syracuse was just like a Greek nation, I think.
Okay. Then the next kind of like interesting thing is that Neapolis held off Hannibal during the Punic Wars, right?
Yeah, which I thought was interesting. It was sort of when they were still a Greek colony, they held off. They teamed up with the Roman Empire. To fight against Carthage and Hannibal, and the walls of Naples did not fall. That's one of their big things.
There's got to be a movie about that.
Probably.
There should be.
I know, right?
Get back Russell Crowe to do some acting in that one.
Exactly.
Very much not the same time period,
but it could be.
It could be cool. Okay, and then speaking of Rome, it became a Roman colony.
Looking at notes here.
Yeah. Oh, okay. It became a Roman colony, but Rome let the people of Naples maintain their Greek culture and language, which I think is really interesting.
Yeah, while also, for what it's worth, building like Roman temples, while also building like a lot of the Roman architecture you see in Rome today is echoed in Naples, and that's I mean, I would argue it's the second. I don't know anything about history, by the way, of Naples. I'm going to be very clear. A lot of this is what we learned over the past couple of years, and in an hour of research, 2 hours of research. But Naples does have a lot of different architectural styles over the years.
Yes.
Originally being Greek and then later being Roman. The Romans, rather than sort of, they sort of admired the Hellenistic culture of Naples, allowed them to keep the language, the customs, the buildings, and added some more Roman buildings. So there's already this interesting mix of Roman and Greek culture in this one city.
Yeah. So then the Roman Empire, the Western Roman Empire fell, declined. And then...
But we're talking like 400 or 500 AD or CE or however you'd like to do it, I believe.
I think so, yes.
Those didn't make it to the notes, but I
It
remember
did
that
not.
from my research earlier.
Yeah, I told you, I'm not. I like history, but I'm not good at recounting it.
But you watch all those like the Yale history things, and you're like, Nathaniel, I just watched this like 18 hours on Pompeii, and we get to Pompeii, and she's like, okay, I remember this guy. He's dead now. We'll come back. Okay.
I'm like, there's a fountain to a nymph somewhere in the forum.
Yes.
Let's go find it.
We should go find this.
That's my history. Okay, so after
We will not be doing a history
this
podcast.
no, we should. It's by non-historians. That's the hook. So the point is that the Western Roman Empire was declining, and then the Ostrogoths.
Yeah, and again, this is where it says broad strokes. Essentially, the Germans,
Yes.
for lack of not Germans today, but the Germanic tribe.
Yes. So then they captured Naples.
Mm-hmm.
You might already be getting the sense that Naples is being taken over a lot. An astute observation.
Yeah, sort of their hallmark, if you will.
Okay, so then after the Ostrogoths, after the Germanic peoples overtook Naples, they were overtaken by the Byzantine Empire. And then in the 700s AD, it became the Duchy of Naples. Great name.
Unless it's pronounced Duchy of Naples, but I don't think it is. It feels Duchy of Naples.
Or Duchy?
Duchy?
Duchy's
It's like
cute.
Ducato in Italian, so much like Duchy, non so.
I like Duchy.
Duchy.
Kind of sounds like a pie, you know?
Yeah, I've got a little Duchy of Naples in heaven.
Exactly. So the Duchy of Naples switched from being under the having an allegiance to the Byzantine Empire to having an allegiance to Rome, back and forth again.
The old switcheroo.
And then basically Naples gained complete independence in the early 800s AD.
Or C, if you're a historian.
Okay, well, we've established, Nathaniel, that I'm not a historian. Okay, I'm sorry. CE. Okay, so then, yet again, fell to someone else. It fell to the Normans.
I was going to say, go ahead.
The French.
No, I was going to say, but it's also interesting. They were using the Normans as mercenaries. The Normans just gained a much larger foothold, basically, in that entire
Naples
area.
was using...
Norman mercenaries to fight the Lombards, to fight the
everybody. And then they were like, cool, we could just take you over.
I think essentially they were like, well, you know what? We have a huge foothold here. We have a lot of friends. We have allegiances. We have money. We have power, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It wouldn't be that much of a next
Stretch.
step. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they got it handled. Wow. Okay, wild. So then after that, the Sicilians took over, is what I have in my notes.
Which is amazing notes. These are...
I'm a historian. The Sicilians took over. So Charles I, who was French, he was the king of the Kingdom of Sicily. And he moved the capital of the Kingdom of Sicily, which was in Palermo, to Naples.
Exactly.
Interesting, right? And so thinking about architecture again, you mentioned earlier that there was already the Greek architecture happening in Naples. Now there's Roman architecture happening in Naples.
Possibly Byzantine after being under Byzantine rule.
Yes, makes sense. Charles I, he brought French architects and people to build buildings in Naples, the new capital. And so that's where a lot of the Gothic architecture, which I think a lot of people think of when they think of Naples, that's where that comes from.
Including the main cathedral of Naples.
It is Gothic. Okay, so moving right along to 1282, after
a couple hundred years under basically, for lack of better, not French rule, but under rule of Kingdom of Sicily.
Yes, which had a French king.
Yeah,
so,
for a lot of it.
Okay, so then 1282, after the Sicilian Vespers, the Kingdom of Sicily was divided into two kingdoms: the French Kingdom of Naples and the Spanish Kingdom of Sicily, which I think is interesting because I feel like in Italian history, the Kingdom of Two Sicilies pops up a lot, and I feel like this is kind of where the split
the
happens.
Two Sicilies, yeah.
Yeah.
The Vespers, by the way, for anyone listening, just a rebellion. Just it has a fun name, the Sicilian Vespers, but it's just I don't know. I thought it had
a
something to do
rebellion
with,
in Sicily.
Yeah,
Cool.
which is very cool. But what a fun name for just a rebellion.
Great name. So then, hopping right along to the 1400s CE, Alfonso the First of Sicily recaptured Naples, and the two became one
Yeah,
again.
but still, I believe it's still called the Kingdom of Two Sicilies,
Yeah.
not the Kingdom of Sicily
Well,
ever.
it was like the two kingdoms, and then they became one under
Yeah,
Alfonso, and it was the Kingdom of Two Sicilies.
which is kind of wild.
So during this whole time, from 1282 to 1501 specifically, the Kingdom of Naples, or the Kingdom of Two Sicilies, I should say, was friendly with Spain. And then in 15...
Technically, I'm just because with what we read was also the Iberian Peninsula is what it was friendly with. So I don't know if
Okay.
that was supposed to just like Andalusia or Spain or Portugal or but essentially this region, the Iberian Peninsula, but Spain for again broad strokes.
Okay. So then in 1501, Naples became under the rule of just France. So they're really hopping around a lot between their being ruled by Spain and France, and then the Kingdom of Two Sicilies, which is basically Spain and France. So then 2 years after that, Spain took Naples back from the French.
Yeah, literally 2 years after that,
That is wild.
they won a war in Gaeta, which is funny enough today, where the Naples, well, I think where the Italian Coast Guard trains, but it's also like with the Naples like water police train. It's a whole thing. It's also where the olives are from, just up the coast from Naples. But they won a war in Gaeta and won in that war Naples. Apparently, nobody wanted to sack Naples. They're like, no, Naples is cool. Let's chill it with Naples.
It seems like the city of Naples was basically maintained. It just swapped hands a lot.
Yeah, I don't, and that's the thing. We couldn't find out. There was later, much later, 15, 1600s. I think there was like the sort of there's like a pillaging of Naples, but it was like where a lot of piracy and slavery basically started. The it was Barbary pirates. I can't remember. I just literally read it and I didn't put it in here because it felt kind of depressing, as slavery tends to be. But no, I think there's basically it never was like the great sacking of Naples was never really a thing. Like the great fires of Rome and stuff like that.
Yeah. I mean, I find that interesting, which it's cool because you can still see, I mean, you can go there and visit super old buildings on top of other old buildings and smush next to, it's just wild, like the way the history's layered on top of each other there. Okay, so now we are at the 1600s, and Naples was Europe's second largest city, second only to Paris.
Yeah,
Wild, right? That's so cool.
yeah,
Because, I mean, it's not how you think of it now. It's like when people go
yeah. That's a good
on
point.
a vacation in Italy, a lot of people are like, oh, yeah, we might go down to Naples for a day. Meanwhile, for much of history, Naples was...
It was the city.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's also, I think it's, for what it's worth, today the third largest city in Naples, behind Milan, then Rome.
third largest city in Italy.
Sorry. Yeah.
Okay,
Naples
just
is
making sure.
the first largest city in Naples, the third largest in Italy.
Okay, so Naples is under the rule of Spain until around 1700s. And I have in my notes here Caravaggio, Bernini, Giordano Bruno,
Yes.
just because...
I was basically during the Renaissance, it became, I mean, the Renaissance spanning the 100 odd years, it became sort of a home and also a second home for a lot of major players in the Renaissance. So like Caravaggio there's a couple of different, there's like a cathedral he did some paintings in. There's, I mean, he's got a weird, not a weird in a bad way, weird in a good way, history in Naples. He's just got like for being such a powerful player in literally all of Europe. It's like he was in Naples. Dante obviously is not from Naples, but spent time there. And there's a statue to him. There's a subway stop, which is really the best way to honor somebody. Giordano Bruno is just interesting. He's a philosopher. He's got all sorts of kind of an esoteric philosopher. He's all big on like alchemy and magic, and sort of also like I think memory or something. He's kind of just a fascinating sort of individual. And then of course Bernini as well, sculptor, I should say. No, but it was kind of like the place to be for a while. It was like as you mentioned, second to Naples, Paris earlier.
Yeah.
But
It's huge.
it was like one of the most hopping cities in Europe. And if I may mention really quickly, something we had learned about a lot of why it switched hands is because it's pretty much, apart from Marseille, I think one of the only major seaports in the Mediterranean. And it used to be that if you controlled Naples, you controlled the Mediterranean. You could send ships south, you can send them north, but even if you controlled Marseille, for example, you still had to go south not actually past Naples, but Naples was a really good like last place to go to kind of get provisions and supplies and this that the other thing. But one of the major reasons that we learned, I think last year before, we were talking to somebody who's from Naples, and they're like, yeah. So essentially, like if you wanted to control the Mediterranean, you had to control Naples. And even when it switched hands, even for like a couple months or a couple years, it was still a huge benefit to whoever owned it.
Yeah, absolutely. Which leads me to my next bullet point: fighting, fighting, fighting.
A true historian. You pretty much summed up history with that one.
I really have. I'm very good at my job. No, it's just what you said and what we've been talking about. People fighting back and forth. It's trading hands.
Oh yes, of course.
People just fighting over Naples because it's awesome and
It's
they all loved it. Yes.
That's why people fight, of course.
So in we've been talking about it being the Kingdom of Two Sicilies. It officially became the Kingdom of Two Sicilies in 1815.
Yes.
Before then, it was just
Well, no, I think it was known as the Kingdom of Two Sicilies. It became, it was a different, there's the Duchy, what are you calling it?
the Duchy of Naples.
The Duchy of Naples. I think there's Duchy of Sicily. I think it was Kingdom of Sicilies before, but it wasn't its own kingdom. It was always under somebody else's rule, I believe. It was always
Right.
under like Roman rule. But then this became an independent, I believe, kingdom.
In 1815.
Again, broad strokes. I could be wrong. Please forgive us.
Okay, so 1839. It was the first Italian city with a railway.
Thought that was interesting. It went from Naples to Portici, which is just south of Naples, and that railway is still used today. I hopefully they've replaced some parts of it, but to connect Naples to Salerno. Just thought it was a bit of fascinating bit of interest to know. Again, we have Milan, you have Torino, you have Rome, you have these major cities, and Naples is still the first one to get a railway.
Yeah, it's really crazy. So that was like from one high to a low is where we're going next. 1876, not that much long after. From 1876 to 1913, 4 million people left Naples. Which, number one, 4 million people were living in Naples
Yeah.
in the 1800s,
Which is kind of,
turn of the century.
Because even back when you mentioned Naples was second only to Paris, I think it only had something like 500,000 people living there. So that was when it was like the second biggest city in all of Europe. So when we're talking about early 1800s or late 1800s,
Excuse
me, 4 million people is just a stupendous amount of people, just for example.
Yeah. And so they all left and went to North America, South America, broadly, right?
I think this is why too, if I may, the two things that pushed this, by the way, is as they say, there's a lot of things that push this, especially in the region where we're living, but essentially higher taxes on wheat, which made, not to be funny, but I think Italians eat something like 60 pounds of pasta a year, like per person, per Italian. So when wheat went up in price and people can't afford to make pasta anymore, mixed with cheaper prices on seafaring. Sort of like the Ryanair of flights, I guess, back in the day. But between those two things, a lot of people are like, yeah, Naples, we gotta
I mean, it's very much
leave.
like now. Bread is more expensive and short haul flights are really cheap.
And Ryanair just made its biggest year ever in profits. Not that anybody really needs to know that or cares, but I just read an article about that.
I'm not excited about it, but it's an interesting point.
No. And that's why, though, the reason we wanted to mention that part is because I think a lot of people in America who are of Italian descent, especially people who don't know where in Italy they're from, they're like, I think we're Italian, I'm not sure where. It's almost guaranteed you're from the South. And it's really a really strong chance you're from Naples or the region around Naples. Because Naples had 4 million people leave, but the entire region around Naples probably had at least that many people. The entire, because we're living in Campania. And that was one of the hardest hit regions from basically wheat, but also people are like, I got so-and-so's cousins living in New York. You should go visit them, see if you can get a job. And of course, that's how everybody ended up wherever they ended up.
Yeah, absolutely. And just like a note on that, I think as Americans, we're often, like, we know a lot about our immigration, but I was somewhat surprised to know, which is probably terrible, but let's blame it on my American education. Somewhat surprised to know that a lot of Italians went to major cities in South America. That, like in our town where we live now, there are a lot of people who have returned from Venezuela and Argentina, a few people from Chile,
And
So
even Argentina, like across the valley, there's a town that pretty much everybody went to Argentina. There's one down the valley. It's some wealthy guy. Actually came back, I think, in the '60s. Like his parents or grandparents had left, and he came back. He had made millions in Argentina, and he built a cathedral down the valley, our church down the valley from us.
the super modern one, right?
Yeah, super modern one. Yeah, but like almost, it's again going back to that thing of like in our town, it's pretty much Venezuela. But that was only because it's Maria's nephew's in Venezuela and Caracas. You should go visit him, and then that becomes all of a
And
sudden.
then all the cousins went.
Yeah,
And then,
and
yeah.
even like across the valley, like there's one that's New Jersey. It's not New York. It's New Jersey. It's like a couple towns in New Jersey. So that's all to say that it's once you had a reason to go somewhere, people went to that one place and didn't really leave, but still come back. A lot of people still come back here to visit.
Yeah, absolutely. And more people are coming back here to live and reclaim their citizenship. So back to Naples. Okay. So we talked about how 4 million people left Naples, right? And then in 40 years, the population of Naples, basically it only went up by a fourth compared to Milan doubling in size. But Naples was still the biggest city in Italy. It's just that tons of people had left and the population was not increasing like it had been in the past. And all of that is because, like what we've been talking about. And there was a big cholera epidemic.
In the late 1800s, I think.
Yeah, and that happened in a lot of southern Italy, right?
Yeah.
So obviously people died,
It died and left,
and
yeah.
people left because it was dangerous.
'Cause they got hit by a couple in the 1800s, but then a large one, I think, in the 1860s, and this is just before the mass emigration started. But a lot of people, because then there were plans to, basically, one of the thoughts was, it's because you have tight alleyways, we should make these giant broad boulevards instead. That way the wind can clear out the town. And that kind of worked. If some parts of Naples do have these beautiful broad boulevards, and some are tiny little alleyways, and there's a new sewage system, but that was, rampant corruption halted that a number of times. It was just one of those things where like, oh Jesus, it's never going to end.
So all that sad stuff is happening in Naples. And then we come to World War II, much later. Well, not that much later, but much later. And it was the most bombarded city in Italy when World War II happened.
By the Allies. So just to be clear here, this was us. This is
But also, it was World War II, right? That you said Germans came in and sacked
Well, they didn't stand up to the Italian fascists. Naples did not, which is sort of kind of goes with their history. I love Naples, but they don't really stand up to the people. That's actually not true. Something you did skip. Not that important, but there's a very brief minor revolution. Masaniello, I think is his name. It was like Tommaso Agnello. Anyway, there's a fisherman's revolution. It was like there's discontent in Sicily. They had this minor revolution. In Naples, the same thing. There's a tax on like fruit and a bunch of other kind of poor people food, mixed with the fact that they were being mistreated heavily by the Duke at the time. There's this whole thing that led basically this fisherman to sort of like, we should take back Naples. Tried to keep a handle on things, couldn't. Apparently you cannot control a mob. Who knew? A lot of people died. He always had his fisherman garb on though, while like doing the executions. It's a whole thing.
Again, movie out of that.
Right? Wild. And then 4 months later, they lost the kingdom of
like the independent.
Yeah, they lost independence basically. Yeah. But that is all to say is, besides a handful of times here and there, they're pretty much been okay to live under whoever, as long as it doesn't cause total rampant destruction and. Which I think is kind of like, but that's the thing. It's like you don't destroy Naples because it is the jewel of the South kind of thing. So I think I don't know, it's almost like the sort of World War II obviously changed. World War I changed a lot of things, but World War II I think changed a lot of things. And all of a sudden, you're talking about bombing cities, which is not a thing some 40 years prior. It's like, I think World War I really saw that and being put into use. But no, all that is to say is that was sort of destroyed a lot of architecture, destroyed a lot of history. And while they didn't stand up at all to the Italian fascists, they were, I think, the first city in Italy to revolt against the German occupation. And so the Germans, I think, burned the library and the university. They destroyed the royal accords, not the royal accords, the royal, I think royal accords, whatever. It's basically the royal depository of knowledge, whatever we call that, in the castle. As well as like they set timed bombs out throughout the city.
Yes.
Like they left, and I think October 1st is when the Germans left, and then into November these bombs were going off that were basically, I guess, dynamite in a timer or some slow
Absolutely
fuse
insane.
or something. So like for a month and change afterwards, they basically bombs are going off and under churches, uh, buildings, just here and there.
Hmm.
So that I think would probably, I mean, I don't know much about corruption in Naples, but I can only imagine the rebuilding efforts were as rampantly corrupt as the building efforts that came before it.
Yeah, that makes sense. Don't know
Yeah.
anything about it, but probably.
Because and I think is that where your notes end?
That's where
Where?
my notes end, but it's also going into talking about like things that you want to see when you visit Naples. And one of the biggest, I guess, like tourist attractions is a neighborhood, Quartiere Spagnolo, Spanish
Spagnoli.
Quarter, Spagnoli, scusa. The Spanish Quarter, which was, as far as we can tell, the barracks that were built for Spanish soldiers,
In the 1600s, yeah.
which is interesting.
Basically to also quell any revolts that were happening in Naples. It was sort of, kind of, if I'm not mistaken, I think we talked about this in the Siena episode. There's that beautiful garden now in the castle, but there's this castle technically just outside of Siena. I mean, we would consider it within Siena, but back in the day it was outside of Siena. And I'm spacing on the name of this castle. Oh, Castle Medici. That's what it is now. And it was never used by the Sienese. It was always used by an invading force, a conquering force, to keep any rebellions quelled within Siena. And I think that's just fascinating because, I mean, that's kind of the point of this Spanish Quarter is you build barracks and you keep people quelled, so to speak. But now, of course, it's a major tourist attraction. And despite the fact that it's like also sort of a very heavily lived in place, it's not like,
Oh, absolutely.
you know, for what it's worth, we don't really talk too much about, we do talk about tourism. What am I talking about? We don't talk too much about like where you should stay necessarily, but you should not stay in the Spanish Quarter. It is, in my opinion, it is, unless you stay in like a really nice place or something like that, but it's built small, if that makes sense. Like it's these buildings are fairly large, but like when we walked around, there are these sort of, especially as you get kind of away from like the major roads of the Spanish Quarter into some of the older parts of it. No, you see these older people living in 25, no, 50, 60 square feet like
Or
apartments.
less.
I mean,
I would
tiny
say
little
that some of
apartments.
them are definitely less. It's a beautiful section of the city when you're walking around. It's super vibrant and there's people.
100 square feet rather. Sorry, not 60 square feet. Like 100 square feet, maybe apartments.
Yeah.
Like 10
thank you.
feet by 10
I'm
feet.
thinking of square meters is what I'm
Oh,
thinking
okay. See, that's what I was, okay.
of. Yeah. I sound so fancy. I never think in meters. No, but it's really crazy. I mean, the streets are, it's city blocks is what it is.
Exactly.
It's city blocks going up an
hill,
incline,
yeah.
up a hill. I didn't realize how far it went until last time we really walked around when we visited last, and it goes up. I mean, you get a good huff and puff going on when you go all the way up. But it's city blocks and apartment buildings is really what it looks like. Or row houses that are built into apartment buildings in some
Yeah.
cases. But as you walk along the street, there's no sidewalks because we're in Italy. And basically along these what look like alleyways, but they're fully fledged roads, are people's like clean laundry out drying, and it's some people have little like cages around their balcony, which can be barely above the street sometimes, where they inside the little cage is like where they have the laundry, and it's like beautiful Renaissance like modern day Renaissance
Yeah,
sort of
exactly.
thing
Yeah,
going
yeah.
on. But then you look in these little people's houses and people are often super nice, saying hello and chatting. And if you peep into someone's house, I mean, it can be like what we were saying. It's like 20 square meters, like 100 square feet. It's like a kitchenette, a room for like a love seat,
Yeah.
maybe a small dining room table, a bathroom that you can't see, but you can imagine it's tiny, and then a bedroom.
Not even a bedroom. Sometimes like we saw beds in like it's in the kitchenette, the table, the love seat, and either twin or double bed in the back. And these, for what it's worth, too. I mean, the people we know, some of the more fortunate ones, I would say, live in them most of the year or some of the year, and then live like they have like a house somewhere in the countryside, where
Like the family home
like a
that's
family home somewhere
been
where you are.
passed down to the generations. Yeah.
Because I'm thinking like those are probably, because those are also expensive. Like even a few times we've looked at those just for buying. I mean, these are not like, oh, you think this 100 square feet apart. No, it's like $500,000 for an apartment in this area, if not more. And again, we're talking ground floor, no natural light, constant motor little Vespas going by, and there's I think we're going to aim for 45 minutes on this. We've already pretty much going to go over. So instead of talking about food and language and customs and culture, which we'll go ahead and do in the next episode, we'll do a little back to back, I think, maybe just to put out two in the same day.
Yeah.
Because what I want to just talk about very briefly is the third space, I think, which is a word that we're hearing more and more of recently. But it's essentially your first space is your house, your second space is your work. And there's this question of the third space. And like I know that libraries are often lauded as a free third space. You can go to a library, no expectation of spending money. You can, you're warm, dry. You can read. You can be on the computer. You can do whatever you want. It's a library. It's amazing. It's a bathroom, etc. But there's a big question around like there are fewer and fewer free third spaces, and I think like Italy has a big culture around the piazza being a third space.
Yeah, definitely.
That was big. That was huge during COVID, when all of a sudden you couldn't hang out in the piazza. And a reason I mention this all is like, especially when you get into the history of things like I'm recently reading that the Geography of Genius by Eric Weiner. I'm not sure his last name. But he talks about like, especially in ancient Athens, like you literally spend like 45 waking minutes in your house. You're there to sleep, and that's pretty much it. But you spend the rest of the day out. You're in the agora, you're in the marketplace, you're walking around, you're whatever it is. And I think like I'd almost argue that especially older Southern Italy especially, is still like that in many regards.
Absolutely, it's totally like that in like where we live in our town.
And even like in the apartments too, I think, because it's so often that we'll find apartments, even in northern Italy, where they're tiny, but they're like, yeah, but what are you doing here? If you're a student, you're at your studies, what am I talking about? University all day, and you're out drinking, and you're out, out at a park, and you're in the sun, and you're not supposed to be at your apartment. And I think there's such a in America, this is such a, my house is my space. Like this is where I close the door and I shut out the world. And it's like, and the reason I bring all this up is because in Naples, you're talking about like, there are all these little balconies that maybe are a foot off the ground, literally a foot off the ground. Or people just have their door and windows open because it's like, you need the light and you might as well have it open. People have the laundry. They're out there, they're playing card games. They're eating. They're always shelling something, always like fava beans.
But also families are also over. Again, like our experience is just walking through and chit-chatting with people if they say hello. But like clearly the grandmothers will be having like the grandkids over. And maybe the grandkids are staying the night. And they've put extra beds, like twin beds, in this tiny living room. And it's just like, it's a very different culture of people. I was going to say maximizing their space. They're just living.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know.
Maximizing it.
Yeah. No, they're just like, and then the, different grandmas will go over to the other grandma's house and they'll have coffee over there. And, know, people are moving around, and I don't know if they even think about, I'm sure they think about, maybe having a bigger house one day.
But sometimes that you mentioned these big family homes out and where we are, and it's like a lot of people come from the city once or twice a year to their family home. I'm putting a lot of quotations around this, by the way, because family home could be they got it 400 years ago and they moved to Naples 300 years ago and only come back once a summer for the last couple hundred years. But no, I mean, and there's space and there's a garden and there's this and there's multiple bedrooms and some of them are plumbed, some are on the verge of being plumbed and some aren't, depending how old it is and when was the last time it was actually used. So all that is to say, as a very brief wrap up, is while the Spanish Quarter is very much a tourist destination, one of many in Naples, to be clear, it is kind of an interesting like view into a sort of for us it was a fascinating microcosm. Like we've always known about the studio apartment. We've lived in 4 studio apartments or something, but it was the first time where it was like, I think seeing it as a I think you and I always lived in a studio apartment as like, this is our apartment. It's not very big. I wish we had more space. And they're like, we have all the space in Naples. Like that Naples is right there kind of thing. And it was a different way, I think, of looking at it. So to keep this as close to 45 minutes as possible, and we're already 3 minutes over, in the next episode, we wanted to very briefly talk about why all the food you eat in America is actually Napolitano food. Or not all the food in America, but all the Italian food you eat in America is Napolitano food. Some of the language and customs and culture in Naples, as well as some else. I think there's some other little.
Yeah, I don't know. We'll find it. We'll get there.
We'll get there. But we're going to release these back to back. So if you'd like, you can go ahead and click play on the next one. And
Yeah, thanks for listening to part 1 of the episode we thought was only going to be one part.
Thank you all, seriously though, so much for listening. We are back. Hopefully this will be at least for the next 6 or 7 months. We're going to try to be pretty steady with this because we really, I think, both enjoy doing this. We hope it's helpful.
Mm-hmm.
We hope
that's
you're
number
learning.
1. Hopefully it's helpful.
Hopefully it's helpful and somewhat entertaining, maybe. Darcy's historian
my
skills.
brilliant and accurate history.
It was. I love it. It was 1501 is one of your things, and then roughly 1700s, and then fight. I like this.
Yeah.
Cascading
it's
level.
Basically
of
a textbook.
It is honestly basically a textbook. But thank you all so much for listening. We have gotten a number of followers since we've last published an episode. I think we are up to 170 on Spotify.
Exciting.
Don't know the statistics on other ones. But seriously, thank you all so much for the reviews, for the follows, for all of that stuff. It's very helpful. And I don't know the words to thank you all so very much.
Thank you so much. We should stop talking now and get to part 2.
So thank you all for listening.
Thanks
and
for
we hope to see you in
listening.
part 2.